Welcome to the Travis Masterbone podcast. I am your host, Travis Masterbone, talking some shit to impact your life. This is episode 12, titled Rob Kiyosaki and Rich Dad, Poor Dad. If you lose your job tomorrow, how many days, months, or years could you survive with your current savings? That is the true definition and measure of wealth. Robert Kiyosaki, Japanese-American entrepreneur, businessman, and author, founder of Rich Global and his financial educational company, the Rich Dad Company. He is famous for his best-selling book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad. And I stumbled upon this individual early in my financial endeavors, and this book literally changed my life. And I also recently had the absolute pleasure of bumping into this legend at a restaurant down the street from me. I had a couple of drinks with him and some dinner, no big deal. Moving forward, pecked his brain quite a bit, and it inspired me to dive back into this book and a few other books of his that have really influenced me quite a bit. And I wanted to do an episode specifically about his famous book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad. This book was released back in 1997. It was on the Wall Street Journal, New York Times, Business Week, bestseller list for years, and has become the #1 personal finance book of all time. And for me, it's been one of my staples in shaping and improving my financial IQ. And so why not take a look-see at what is inside? So let's get into it right away. The foundation is pretty simple. Rob Kiyosaki. Rob grew up with two dads. He had his real father, the poor father, and then he had the father of his best friend, the rich dad. And this book, in a nutshell, expands upon how these two men shaped his perspective on money and investing. I resonate quite a bit with this, and I will get into that a little bit later. And one of the main things that we really need to take hold of is, we talked about this at the bar, is the educational system. He's very anti-public education when it comes here in America. And he also highlights how the school system is literally the starting point and why so many individuals are behind the ball on their finances and when it comes to financial IQ and end up being stuck in the rat race. And so back to the fathers. He had one father that was actually the poor father, a wall full of degrees and diplomas, high education. And then the other father was actually a high school dropout. Now, I am someone with a bachelor's degree and a master's degree. I am not against some of the valuable aspects that a college brings to the table, such as social development, discipline sharpening, and just the overall experience of it. If you get the right degree, I think it can be useful. However, it is most definitely not the end-all, be-all in regards to success. There is a lot of pompous, degree-holding smugs out there. And if their high horse behavior is fueled by their perception of success because of their education, well, I can tell these individuals to fly a kite. But also on the other end of the spectrum, it doesn't necessarily mean if you don't attend college or you just drop out under the guise that you'll be just like Rob's second father or Steve Jobs just because you did the act alone. Well, I think you're going to be sadly mistaken. What I believe is just because you end your public education. When I finished my master's degree and my education, I did not stop my overall education with life. I still filled my brain with plenty of books, the right books, such as this one, Rich Dad, Poor Dad. And I attended a lot of seminars and acquired a lot of mentors. And I think most importantly is developing a high tolerance to risk and not being afraid to go out there in business ventures and attacking your dreams and just not being afraid to fail at those things, right? Experience is key. And so with that being said, back to the dads here. One thing's for certain. The poor dad, once they pass away, much like my dad, they will leave behind nothing but debt. The rich dad, on the other hand, Rob's rich dad, he's going to die and end up one of the richest men to ever, one of the richest men ever in Hawaii, and he's going to pass his fortune down to his children. And so, again, I experienced this with my own dad. He was very intelligent, and I'm not knocking him whatsoever. He did everything that he could to take care of me. He loved me. He loved my stepmother, and he was also a small business entrepreneur, so he wasn't completely on the poor dad spectrum, but for the most part, he just didn't have assets. And when he passed, all he had was debt. And so that kind of opened my eyes a bit when that rug got pulled out from under me, and actually propelled me in my financial journeys to actually take it quite seriously. And so one of the other things that we're going to highlight here in the beginning of this book is the idea of one dad's philosophy of, I can't afford that, versus the other dad, the rich dad, how can I afford that? You know, what do I have to do to afford that? And this is a big quote. Quote, there's a difference between being poor and being broke. Broke is temporary, poor is eternal. End quote. And I wanted to just start off with a little bit of that. And as we get into this book, there are two primary takeaways. One being the rich don't work for money. And two is financial literacy. Okay, financial literacy. And with all that being said, I think that is the pinnacle of this entire conversation, is just getting the jargon down and putting in the effort to improving your financial savviness. And in no way, shape, or form am I a multi-millionaire, or am I some brilliant guru that's going to change your life with every single word that I utter here today. But I am going to give you a little bit of perspective, and I am going to dive into these takeaways, and hopefully you can learn something from all of this. I sure have, and I've been applying it in my own way in my own life. So takeaway number one, the rich don't work for money. What does that mean? The poor and the middle class work for money. The rich have money work for them. And how does this cycle work for the poor and middle class? It essentially starts from the fear of not having money, and this motivates you to work harder. Now, how they work harder, that is the story right there. The paycheck gets deposited, and then the poor and middle class gets absorbed by consumerism, new cars, new clothes, new home, country club dues, etc. Their cycle, or their pathway or pattern, I should say, increased earning leads to increased spending. And this is the definition of the rat race, with no asset acquirement whatsoever, not even on the radar. It is nothing but liabilities under the guise that those are assets. And so with that being said, assets, liabilities, Rob Kiyosaki is famous for his position that a house is not an asset. I will repeat, he is famous for his position that a house is not an asset. Let me dive a little deeper. Controversial at first, but when you think about it, he's absolutely correct depending on how you acquire it. Ask those who got obliterated during the '08 financial housing crisis. Leveraging shitty loans, acquiring multiple homes when they are not qualified to do so, and the next thing you know, the houses go under and they can't make their payments due to the loan agreements that they made, the adjustable rate mortgages. The rate adjusts and they go under. So just banking on the fact that you're buying a house just for the sake that you think it's an asset, and banking on just equity and natural appreciation is a silly move. Okay? And so Rob Kiyosaki, famous for that, but also just the basic, simple idea that an asset is something that puts money into your pocket. A liability is something that takes money out of your pocket. And this seems pretty simple, but to the poor and middle class that are stuck in the rat race, consumerism mentality, this simple concept isn't even on the radar. And so back to the house. It comes with a mortgage. It comes with property taxes. It comes with insurance, maintenance. It comes with interest if you borrow. And these are all financial liabilities that take money out of your pocket. There's no guarantee of natural appreciation. And the biggest loss is opportunity cost. So now all your funds are tied up into this house that you reside in, the door that you pay for. You can't utilize that money elsewhere in other potential profitable investments. And then you're stuck in this 30-year mortgage. That's predominantly what people sign up for. And then not to mention the grand total that you're going to pay over time with the interest. So ask yourself, is it truly an investment? Is this truly an asset? Never pay for your own door. This is a philosophy that is also held by the great Grant Cardone, also one of my staple mentors that I've read and watched plenty of videos about. He owns hundreds of millions, if not billions, in real estate. And all his doors are being paid by other people. He is not working for his money. And this is the concept of leverage, borrowing money. Okay, and then you can borrow against these assets and multiply and then use strategies to avoid paying taxes within, of course, the realms of the law. So I assume. But that's the basic idea. Okay, if you buy a house and you can't afford the liabilities, guess what? It's not an investment, plain and simple. And so don't just live in your home and treat that as your cash cow alone. It is pure speculation. You can get lucky, but it is still speculation, aka gambling. But instead, do whatever you can to develop maybe a rental property portfolio. Have someone else pay your doors. Setting the foundation first and acquiring income-producing assets. Don't get caught in the rat race. Again, the rich don't work for money. They don't pay for their own door. Someone else does. And this is a great takeaway quote for this first subject here in this book. Quote, "A job is a short-term solution. Getting enough to pay expenses with the long-term challenge of building your net worth. The more you get paid, the higher your expenses become. And this is human nature, driven by fear and desire. And once you get stuck in this cycle, you are forced to work for someone else for the rest of your life." End quote. So, moving on to takeaway 2. Why teach financial literacy? Financial literacy. I guess from that first takeaway, it's easy to say that it is not necessarily how much money you make, it is how much you keep. And then also I would add how you invest it is also very important. We talked about the educational system. The educational system, its sole purpose is to turn you into an employee. They're not necessarily developing entrepreneurs and giving you that personal financial IQ that you actually really need. Okay, even the basics, it's really quite insane. Dissect a frog over learning about credit, learning about things like leverage and borrowing and loans and assets and liabilities. It's absolutely bonkers. Moving forward, we broke down assets and liabilities, but one of the main foundational principles when it comes to financial literacy is expanding upon the term cash flow. Quote, "Cash flow tells the story of how someone handles money." End quote. The definition of cash flow is the measure of how much cash a company or person takes in versus how much it spends. Real simple math. More cash coming in versus going out is cash flow positive. More going out versus coming in is cash flow negative. And so when analyzing a business, it seems obvious that a business is considered healthy, dependent on their prolonged period of time in the cash flow positive realm. Okay? And so I highly suggest that you revisit my Warren Buffett episodes. I break down in great detail an income statement, and a balance sheet when it comes to business. But we're going to apply it here on the personal level. Your own personal income statement will show you what income is coming in versus what expenses are going out. Cash coming in for the poor and middle class is your salary. Cash going out is expenses, liabilities. This includes rent, food, taxes, credit cards, your toys, country club dues, and of course your mortgage. So if you work a job and you live paycheck to paycheck, you make just enough to pay the expenses, maybe save very little. And we all know that little that is saved is just absolutely obliterated to inflation. Or worse, you become cash flow negative. More is going out versus what's coming in. And then you have to take a look at your balance sheet. Well, for the poor and middle class, on their balance sheet, assets and liabilities, you got a lot of fucking liabilities and no assets. This is the poor middle class example when it comes to cash flow. Now let's look at what the rich does. The rich is obsessed with building the asset column. Income producing assets that substitute the salary. It doesn't necessarily mean that the salary is gone altogether, but it's just that the primary focus is building these assets. And I'll list those in just a moment. And then obviously limiting and minimizing liabilities. So the cash coming in is coming from assets. Cash going out is still your liabilities, but stays cash flow positive. Same exact thing as if you were analyzing a business from my Warren Buffett episode. Okay, so the big takeaways. Why don't we go into what the fuck a real asset is? If a house isn't an asset, let's go into some real assets. Asset number one, an income producing apartment. This could expand into a triplex, a duplex, or a house, whatever. But this generates monthly payments from tenants, allowing you to pay the loan on that property and whatever expenses that come with it that I listed earlier, insurance, taxes, etc. And then whatever's afterwards, that's your cash flow. And on top of all of that, your tenants are paying down your loan and you're building equity, but it's by someone else. Again, a rich move. Number two, you can do this with a business. Again, Warren Buffett episode. You can invest in a business that doesn't require you to be there, to be present for it, to operate and generate income. And if it's your business, your main goal is to get yourself, your employees, and replace yourself by a manager, expand it, etc. The more you take yourself out of the picture, but it generates income for you. This can be a local, tangible thing, much like my car rental business, which I'll get to in a second. But then also number three, asset column, stocks, right? Investing in stocks is just like investing in business. It literally is that, but just from a less tangible standpoint. And then you can also invest in four, and I'll extrapolate a little bit more on the numbers here, but it's bonds, gold, silver, precious metals, cryptocurrencies. These are all prime examples of real assets. And so now back to me and my car rental business. Everyone knows the tried and true knowledge where you purchase a vehicle and as soon as you drive that thing off the lot, it loses its value significantly. Well, with the car rental business, what I suggest, if you have the ability to detach your emotions from this toy, right? Rent out your car or multiple cars like I do. Pay a manager fee. You do the same thing for apartment complexes to pay a manager. You do the same thing for the businesses you purchased. Get a manager, replace you. Pay them a fee. Pay off your monthly lease, your payments, your insurance, your liabilities, and whatever's left over, that's your cash flow. Money coming in without doing any work. I do nothing. In this circumstance, money works for me. And I turned my consumer vehicles into assets, building my asset column, rather than just driving my Lexus around and making it a liability, period, end of discussion. And so in this scenario, I also happened to double dip. I figured out how to get close and acquire equity into the business. So now I have cars producing cash flow, operating as assets, but I am also a shareholder. I have a piece of the actual pie of the business itself, and again, I am not there. So that's just one prime live example that I have learned from this book. Thank you, Rich Dad Kiyosaki. And those are your two prime takeaways here today. And hopefully we learned a lot. Again, I must have said it at least 3 or 4 times. Go back to my Warren Buffett episode. You can definitely dig a little bit deeper into an income statement, your balance sheet, and learn a little bit more about assets and liabilities. And again, just do it yourself. Go look at what you're producing, what income is coming in, and what in the world are you spending, what is going out of your pocket, and get it together. Understanding your own personal income statement and balance sheet is so damn important when it comes to financial literacy. It is your ABCs. And it also requires a shitload of discipline and self-control, right? We are avoiding the consumerism mind state of those rat race, poor, middle-class individuals. And it is what it is. Again, referring back to the beginning of this episode and me chopping it up with Rob at the bar, he blames the public educational system. This is the root of people just not understanding their own financial literacy and not applying these basic tenets of this book. I highly recommend it. Buy it, listen to it. Rich Dad, Poor Dad, Rob Kiyosaki. Go watch some YouTube videos. Go listen to his podcast. He is really, really incredible, intelligent, and I can't recommend him enough. And hopefully you learned a lot from this episode. And as always, please like, share, subscribe, all that shit. And thank you for tuning in to the Travis Masterbone podcast. And I look forward to you coming in next time. Farewell.